Hey guys, it's another beautiful day on the Ashland Hills Homestead, and we're going to be making some wild game meatballs. Now, of course, if you don't have any wild game, you can always use ground beef, and this will still be delicious. But we're going to use some wild elk today, some ground elk. I usually do this with venison, but elk's an awesome substitute as well. So stick around, we're going to do lots of different things today, and hopefully have some delicious meatballs. So let's go through our ingredients. You're gonna need some Parmesan cheese. You're gonna need 2 handfuls of parsley if you're cutting it from the garden. If you get it at the store, 2 bunches. If you get your basil at the store, 1 bunch or a handful from home, and then same with the oregano. I've just found that the fresh ingredients really add a depth of flavor that the dried ones don't. I've certainly done it with Italian seasoning or just these herbs dried. I just prefer the fresh. Then we've got some garlic. We've got a red onion and a yellow onion. I like doing the red onion because it's a little bit stronger, and then I like using the yellow onion because it's a little sweeter. And we're not going to cook any of these items previous to mixing them with the meat. Some people do that. I just find that as your onion cooks when it's raw with the meat, it actually tenderizes it naturally, and it also lets all those liquids and caramelization go into the meat. So I personally like to do it all raw and let it cook together. Then we've got our 3 different meats. If you're using ground beef, you don't need to include the bacon. I think that would be overkill, honestly. But elk and venison are leaner, so you need to account for that. So I'm going to use some sliced bacon today, as well as some ground pork. And I've got about 3 pounds of elk here, or you can use venison or any other wild lean game. Even lamb would be good in this. And then we've got about 1 pound of pork, and then I'd say about 1/2 pound of bacon. Then we're going to use some Worcestershire sauce, because that's always amazing, some salt, some pepper, and then this is just a store-bought steak seasoning mix. I believe it's the McCormick one. I just like to use this because it adds a little smokiness. And then we're going to use breadcrumbs. I prefer panko. I found that when I use the breadcrumbs that are more like a sawdusty texture, it gets really chewy, whereas these still keep it light and fluffy. And then we're going to use our eggs, which will act as a binder for all of these ingredients. All right, so let's start. The first thing I like to do is put the eggs in. And I like to use about 1 egg per pound of the wild meat that I'm putting in. So I'm doing 3 eggs. Obviously you can make this smaller or larger depending on whatever you need. I just like to make a lot at one time because then you can just freeze them. So we're just going to whip these puppies up. Easy peasy. All right, so next we're going to put in the garlic. Okay, so we just minced up this garlic. We want it tiny enough that it's not going to protrude out of the meatballs. So we've just got it into like a nice fine mince like that. And we're going to pop it in here, and then we're going to do the same thing with the onion and the red onion. All right, the next thing we're going to do is add the breadcrumbs, and I'm going to do 1.5 cups, so about half of the measurement of the weight of the wild game meat. Okay, so after the breadcrumbs, we're going to add the Worcestershire sauce, and I'm going to add a tablespoon for each of the pounds of wild meat, so 3 of those. And there we go, as easy as that. And then we're gonna do a tablespoon and a half of our steak seasoning. We're just gonna eyeball this, not be too accurate. And then we're gonna do a tablespoon, just about 3/4 of a tablespoon of some ground pepper. And we ground that up fresh, we just had some extra. And then I'm gonna do about a tablespoon of salt. And that's all I'm gonna do, and the reason why is because the Worcestershire has salt, the Parmesan has salt, and the bacon has quite a bit of salt. So I think that's enough. If you decide, what some people do is they'll take a little piece of the meatball and fry it real quick before they bake it. And that way you can taste test it for seasoning. And if you want more of something else, you can totally adjust that. All right, so next we're gonna put in our Parmesan. And I'm gonna do about a cup or half a cup here. I really love cheese. More cheese is always better. All right, so now what we're gonna do is toss this. I like to mix all of these ingredients first because the fresh herbs will bruise and sometimes wilt, and the meat, if you over mix it, can get tough and it'll detenderize it because of the heat from your hands and all the movement. So I like to mix this first, and then we're gonna chop up all these guys, we're gonna mince these up, and then we're gonna address the meat and do that very last. So this is the texture we're looking for. It's a little bit moist, as you can see, and it's well mixed. I can see all the ingredients are combined now. So we're gonna address the fresh herbs. So the first thing we're gonna do is rinse all these guys, which I did already. And then we're just gonna kind of go through, and if anything looks a little wilty or a little yellow, we're just gonna pull it out. We don't need that. We've got plenty here. All right, so we've got the parsley in there. I've removed any of the stems. You can leave the stems in there, but I found that once it cooks, sometimes the stems can be like a chewy little bit, and you don't really want that in your meatball. So the other thing I was gonna say is with these basil leaves, I found that they bruise a lot less if, when you're cutting them, you just pluck them off like that, and then you take them and you roll them, and then you give them a chop this way, and then just a quick chop the other way, and they're minced, and you won't bruise them, and you won't lose all the juices onto your cutting board. So that's just a quick tip. So we're gonna do that, and then we'll pop them in the bowl. All right, so we've got all the herbs chopped, and I'm just gonna stir them in now. It's still nice and moist. It's a really good texture. We want this to just be wet. We don't want it to be soupy. All right, it smells really good. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is deal with our bacon. So I'm gonna pull it onto a nice plastic cutting board here so we don't get our juices on this wood cutting board. All right, so what I'm gonna do here, We want all the fat. We're not going to trim any of this. Part of the reason why we're using bacon is for the extra fat. For meatballs, generally people like them to be nice and tender and juicy, and that means fat. So we're replacing the usual animal fat that you would get naturally in beef or veal or something like that. Since we have a leaner meat that we're using as our main ingredient, we're just adding in this bacon. But like I said, if you're gonna do all pork or veal or even beef, you can totally leave this out. So I'm just kind of mincing this up here. We don't want a big hunk of fat to bite into, right? If you want to get really fancy about it, you can send it through a meat grinder, but I've found this is totally sufficient for me. Maybe if I was going to make 400 meatballs, I might do that, but this totally works. So this is what we're looking for, just kind of like tiny pieces like that. So we're just going to do that with all the rest of these. Alright, so we finally have all the ingredients in, and I've just wet my hands because that helps it not stick, and it also helps keep the temperature lower on your hands and allows the meat not to absorb that heat as well. So now all I'm going to do is just mix this in by hand. If this freaks you out, then you can totally do this with a spoon. I just generally, whenever it's ground meat, I get in there with my hand and kind of almost turn it and knead it. This is always how my mom did it. And I just find that I have a better sense of what the texture is in here. And I can feel, do I need another egg? Do I need some more breadcrumbs? But this is feeling pretty perfect to me, actually. And again, we don't want to over knead it, but we do want to make sure we evenly mix everything, especially since we have 3 different kinds of meat and a lot of other variables in here. So as long as the meat is still feeling cold to you, it's okay. And I think that's it. I'm not gonna overdo it here. But you can see we've got, if I went like this, it would stay. That's the consistency you want. You don't want something that's gonna fall apart or be glopping off egg or something like that. So this is pretty perfect. So now what I'm gonna do is take about a little golf-sized ball. This is about the size I like, and I'm just gonna lay them right on here on my Silpat, and then I'm gonna bake it in a 375-degree oven for about 35 to 45 minutes. Cookie sheets filled with our meatballs, and we still have a little bit more. I'll probably get about 4 or 5 more out of that. And I just wanted to say a couple quick things. You can do this whole process with a food processor. That's totally doable, especially if you don't have time to hand chop everything. I will say the texture is totally different. It does make it a little tougher. You can't control each individual ingredient and how big you want it to be, but it's totally doable. The other thing you can do is mix this up the night before and then let it sit with just some plastic wrap on it and then bake it the next day. The flavors will be better, but it's completely awesome to just do it like this. And then the last thing is you can freeze the meatballs like this if you don't want to pre-cook them. I generally pre-cook them because we're very busy and trying to do 100 things, and so it's easier for us to have pre-cooked ones that we can just pop in the microwave and have with some spaghetti or have as a sub or whatever you'd like. So we're gonna pop these in our 375 for about 35 to 40 minutes. I keep an eye on them, and we'll just pull them out when they're nice and brown and ready. Okay, so I pulled one off the pan and I can't wait to cut into it. Remember, if you like our videos, please subscribe and click on the bell if you'd like a little ding ding notification, and we hope to see you around.